Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Nanda, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors here at the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees, or NAFR. I would like to begin by recognizing that the Ottawa branch is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past, present, and future contributions to this land and our country. Um, on behalf of the branch, I'm pleased to welcome you today to the webinar entitled Writing Your Own Story, a Guide for Anyone. I want to give a warm welcome to our presenter today, writing coach and author Karen Stiller. Karen is a teacher of writing and a writing coach and a freelance writer and editor. For 22 years, Karen served as an editor at the Canadian magazine Faith Today, and she hosted the Faith Today podcast where she interviewed thinkers and writers. Karen's work has taken her to places throughout Africa, Latin America, and North America. And for several years, she moderated the Religion and Society series at the University of Toronto, a debate between leading atheists and theologians. Karen has a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction from the University of King's College Journalism School and is working on a doctorate in the sacred art of writing at Western Seminary. Her published work includes two books, Holiness Here, Searching for the Ordinary, for God in the Ordinary Events of Everyday Life, and The Minister's Wife, which is a memoir of faith, doubt, friendship, loneliness, forgiveness, and more. I have to confess, Karen is a longtime personal friend as opposed to an old friend. She believes everyone has a story to tell, and I've seen it firsthand when I read the autobiographical story that her father Russ wrote and self-published when he was in his mid-80s. So it's never too late. Um, one of the benefits as well, and I think this is something that may be a benefit to you if you decide to write your own story, is that reading Russ's story helped me appreciate him more and get to know him better as well. So without further ado, oh, I'm sorry. In today's hands-on and practical session, Karen will help you demystify the memoir writing process and get you started on the journey of writing your story. I want to give a special welcome to anybody here who is not yet a member of the association. We hope these webinars will inspire you to join us and our members. And to our members, we hope these webinars will encourage you to maintain your membership. Um, I wanted to mention that closed captions are available in both English and French. To access this feature, click on the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen. And to translate to French, you can click on the little arrow next to the closed captions button and select the translate option. Finally, if you have any questions for Karen, please type in the Q&A box on Zoom, and I understand there's going to be interactive aspects which Karen can explain about using the chat box. So that's all for me, and I'll pass it over to Karen.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone. I love encouraging people in their writing life, and so it's really my pleasure and privilege to be here today. I do have a slideshow that we're going to follow along with, and as Chris mentioned with the chat, there will be a couple of times where you can share in the chat if you want to, and then we'll do the Q&A after. So feel free to participate as much as you'd like, and I think this will be fun, I hope. I know it's going to be fun for me, and I hope it'll be fun for you. And I am going to give you some writing prompts as we go through together. So, I mean, I know you're on your computer, so you can use your laptop. That's how I write most often. But if you want to grab a pen and a piece of paper, if that's more comfortable for you, you can do that as well. So I wanted to. Chris gave me that great introduction, and I'm so glad. And he is a good old friend of mine. Um, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, just so you know who you're stuck listening to and the kind of stories I bring to this. So I'm joining you from Centertown today, where I love to live. Um, I'm sharing. Uh, uh, Basically, these are places that I love and people that I write about often. In fact, my children, our cottage, my late husband, Brent. And I share that because we all bring to our writing life and to the telling of our stories and the discovery of our stories a mix of joy and sorrow, of good things and bad things, our whole histories and our whole selves that have brought us to where we are today. As a writing coach, I work with people. I'm not selling my coaching services here. I'm encouraging you that our ordinary and extraordinary lives are full of stories that are worth telling, and particularly for our families and our loved ones who would love to read a memoir. Chris mentioned my books. Here they are. And I love that he read the subtitle for The Minister's Wife because it's so long and cumbersome and I can never remember it. So that's sort of a funny thing that's common of subtitles. They're chosen by the publisher. I'm sharing this and a bit more of my writing background because I want you to know the kinds of questions that I can answer, pardon me, and the kind of resource I can be for you at the end when we ask our questions. So, when I went, pardon me, back to school to do a Master of Fine Art and Creative Nonfiction, it really changed my writing life. And I ended up getting an agent and publishing The Minister's Wife after many, many revisions. And then later, 2 years ago in April, my second book, Holiness Here, came out. And I'm currently in a doctoral program called The Sacred Art of Writing, where I'm hoping to write another long thing. So The Minister's Wife is a memoir. Holiness Here isn't, but it's full of memoir-like elements because I am a writer who writes from her own life and experiences from my heart and my soul. And I find by doing that, I'm usually able to connect with readers really well. So, the most meaningful part for me about being this kind of a writer now at this stage of my life is hearing the words, me too, and often followed by thank you because people are really happy to know that they're not alone and that there is a way of connecting with each other through the power of telling our true stories. Um, a little example is I was writing my last book when my husband died, unexpectedly. So I wrote an unplanned chapter called Sorrow, which tells the story of the death of my husband. And in doing that, I've connected with so many people who've either lost someone or have experienced a great sorrow. And according to what they've shared with me, felt unseen and unheard because, of course, grief doesn't get talked about that much in our culture. And then that helped me because I also felt less alone. So that is the power of telling our true stories. So it is a beautiful thing to do. And by showing up today, you're in whatever stage you're at in this journey, I'm going to hopefully either prompt you to get started, get you unstuck if you're stuck, and just give you some tools to either begin or keep moving on this writing project that you may be contemplating. So, just to talk briefly about memoir in general, this is a list of like some, best-selling Amazon memoirs that have popped up in the last number of months. Memoir is a very popular genre of reading and writing. Some of these memoirs are by famous authors, but a memoir can be popular because it's a beautiful and honest story, normally around a theme. So, this is a definition from another writing coach, Alison Crawford, and she explains that autobiography is the story of a life, but memoir is stories from a life. So that's a really important distinction that we're going to come back to later. Autobiography is the story of a life. Memoir is our stories from a life. I don't know how many of you read the memoir Wild by Cheryl Strayed. It just like went crazy. It sold so many copies. It was so popular. A movie was made. And at one level, it's a story about a hike on the Pacific Coast Trail. But of course, it's really about her journey of self-discovery. And that's what made it so popular, of course. So, the best kind of memoir is a personal experience telling a universal story. And they're often ordinary stories. You don't have to have had severe trauma or beautiful excitement. You don't need to have climbed a mountain or jumped from a plane to write about your life. Your beautiful, ordinary life holds extraordinary meaning. Author Frederick Buechner, who wrote many memoir like books, in his book, Listening to Your Life, wrote, "The story of any one of us is in some measure the story of us all." And I really love that. And it gives us such freedom to write confidently and beautifully when we might think, well, who would want to read my story or what do I have to say? Well, you do have things to say. And memoir is very much about memory and meaning, which we're going to talk about that a little more. So to the point that a memoir writing tends to be more thematic. Sorry, my little cough here. Many writers write multiple memoirs, which at first seems counterintuitive, but again, memoir are stories and reflections from a life, not necessarily the story of a life. So Dani Shapiro, for example, has written memoirs about her life of faith, the impact of Judaism on her life. She wrote a memoir about realizing her or coming to the revelation that her father was not her biological father, about the impact of her parents' car accident on her life, for example. Mary Karr is another writer who's written multiple memoirs. Anne Lamott, same thing, diving deeply into parts of their own life and sharing universal truths and experiences with readers. And we all grow. So I want to encourage you that thinking about writing your life story can be really daunting. And the truth is, most of the people in your life, including your mother and your children, will find it a slog if you write your life story from I was born on until I retired on, or whatever your span is where you're standing right now. You don't have to write like that. But writing stories from your life is not quite as intimidating for most of us, and it's something we can all do. And I bet you tell stories from your own life quite frequently. So think about if you're at a social setting or you're at your cottage or in your living room or whatever, and you're reminiscing or you're sharing around the dinner table with friends or family. What are the stories that you most often tell? Like, what are your go-to stories? We all have them, and sometimes we get in trouble with people who love us because we tell those stories too much. But there's a reason we tell them because maybe they're exciting, or you learn something, or maybe they were unusual, or they were just like neat little snapshots of your life, either from your childhood or whatever the span. So those stories matter to you for one reason or another. You think that they're good stories. That's why you tell them. And there's stories that connect you to other people generally. And that's why you're telling them in this public setting. So the chat is chattable. You can use the chat. And I just invite you, and there's no pressure, just if it's helpful or if it's a fun way to get thinking about your stories, to use the chat to write down if you're that story you often tell, one of your go-tos, had a title, what would it be? And share those in the chat. So it might be the time I got lost in Times Square, the biggest fish you ever saw, or it might be when my mother died. Just if you want to. And I don't even think I can see if you do it. So there's like literally no pressure from me, just invitation to write in that chat the titles of stories you would tell if you were writing about from stories from your own life. So as you think about and do that, just a reminder what memoir is not necessarily. It's not, and it doesn't have to be, a chronological retelling of your life story. In fact, honestly, it's better if it's not. It doesn't have to be comprehensive. You do not have to include every single thing. No one includes everything in the stories from their life. It's impossible. They're always curated and chosen. It's not a strict reporting of events, people, and places, and it's not going to make you rich and famous for most of us. There are exceptions, of course. And what memoir is potentially a combination of memory and meaning, thematic. For a lot of us writing from our life story, we find the themes as we write, which is a really beautiful gift that memoir holds for us. But you might not set out like, I'm going to write a memoir about success, or I'm going to write a memoir about loss. It's more you're writing a memoir that tells the stories and maybe multiple themes from your life. Memoir is a gift to your community and maybe the world. And it's artful, beautiful writing that draws on the same tools as fiction writing. So, writing your true stories does not need to be boring for anyone. You get to play. So, I'm going to give you some really practical tips. And one of them, and this is really foundational, is read what you want to write. So if you're wanting to embark on a project of writing stories from your life, then embark on a reading mission to read some memoir. And read as an apprentice. Pay a bit more attention when you read to how the writer is doing what they're doing, which is not often how we read. But one of the beautiful things about being a writer, and I encourage emerging writers to embrace this, is that we get to learn and get better at our craft by generally doing something we really enjoy, which is reading. Most writers or people who are writing are also readers. And if you're not, then you're doing yourself and your project a disservice, because you can get really comfortable with this kind of writing by doing this kind of reading. So you notice how the writer has done something. If you read a great story in a scene, and I'm actually going to read you a couple of examples a little bit later, ask yourself how they did what they did. Mark up your book, make notes, highlight things, read it out loud for pace, and just be really curious. You can be curious about the craft of writing as well as your own stories. This is just my in between slide. I'm going to keep giving you some nitty gritty. And I hope this will be freeing to you. And I've already mentioned this. Start in the middle. You do not have to start in the beginning of any writing project because you're going to be revising it anyway. You're going to be changing it because revision is the secret of good writing. But a lot of people struggle with getting started. And I think we've all experienced that, like when you were working full time and you had to write a report or even like an email or like whatever it was. And certainly with this kind of longer form writing, we can be paralyzed by that blank page and by like, where do I even begin? Just just start. And I really mean that. Start in the middle of a story. Don't You can rearrange things later, and that's the beauty of viewing it as a process. I'd almost like to give you like a rule and say like it's against the law to start with I was born in Fredericton in 1959. I mean, you can do that, but I think you should start on with your best school memory. That would be a better place to start. It's more vivid, it's more lively. No one cares about your birth date. So just release yourself of that kind of pressure of starting in the beginning and start with wherever you feel energy. That is the way to get moving. And hold what you write loosely. Treat it as exploration. You will be remembering things, you will discover things, you will have insight, you will come to a better understanding of your life by doing this kind of writing. And that is such a beautiful gift to you and to your family. Memoir is about memory and meaning, it just almost naturally becomes that. So don't You're not writing a perfect first draft. Anne Lamott, who I mentioned earlier, is also a great writing teacher. And she talks about the shitty first draft. Be free to write a shitty first draft. It frees you. You can go back and fix it up. Chris mentioned my dad's memoir, which I love that you mentioned that. You can go theme by theme. I sort of coached my dad through that, and I gave him some headings that he could write about or some topics. And in the end, his book ended up being structured. It's a little corny, maybe, but an introduction and some memories. That was the name of a chapter. Jobs I had growing up. He had a chapter on that. Why and how I built a log house. My girls, a chapter on his daughters. My careers. Life's teaching. A fortunate turn of life's events. That was the chapter in which he talked about marrying my mother. Trips of a lifetime. That was a chapter. Fiddleheads and butternuts. That was, we're from the Maritimes, and that was a big part of our life. My grandchildren. He had a chapter on that, and then a chapter called The End. And it made it a lot easier for him to write. He just, brainstormed a list of topics, and you can do that too. The first step to writing your true story can be making a list of topics, or you can choose one big theme. I don't recommend that, but like just for most of us, it's easier to just like pick a bunch of stories we want to tell and tell them and then find the themes organically. I mentioned this memoirs are curated. No one tells everyone everything. So be free. You don't have to remember every detail of your life. You can actually have fun with this. Okay, this is where you put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. I do have my eye on the clock, so we'll take like 5 minutes. I just want you to pick one of the questions you see on the screen ahead of you, in front of you. Pick one that stirs something in you, around which you feel some energy, and then just do some writing. Make a list. What are the themes of your life? What have been some major events in your life? When you think back, what do you first think about? What are hinge moments where things were one way before and then another way after? Like I've had some big hinge moments, and I'm sure you have too. What have been the victories and the tragedies? What are the memories with the strongest energy? That's really what this is about. What grabs you? Like, what do you want to write about? What are you scared to write about? That can be a great writing prompt. What do you want to write about again? And here's a question from another writing coach, Leslie Leland Fields, but I really loved it. What have I been entrusted with in your life? What have you been entrusted with? And that may be your work, your children, your natural gifting, whatever. It could be wealth, it could be not wealth. What have you been entrusted with? So if you want to just take 5 minutes now and just do some brainstorm, and let's see what you come up with, and you will be able to use this as a way to start writing when you do start writing. And I'm going to just look at my clock so I can call you back, which I will. Okay, let's start drawing back in. Um, my hope is that you came up with a few things and that writing list can become, well, those prompts, these prompts can become a list of topics for you to dive into when you're ready to start writing or to add to the writing you're already doing. So if you want, why don't you take a picture of the screen before, if you want to, but obviously, before I forward it along, just because it is a good list, I think that you could go back to and use to just start stirring up some thoughts. And one thing I encourage, like earlier this morning, I was teaching a university class in Toronto online, obviously, about writing. And one of the exercises I have them do at the beginning is find a writing notebook. It can be anything, but most of us do love going to a stationery shop or whatever, or a bookstore and buying an empty notebook and carrying it with us always. And you can also use the Notes app on your phone, of course. I've written partial chapters on the Notes app on my phone when I'm walking, and just start noticing things as you move as an active writer in the world. You will start seeing things differently, ordinary things. So as you write your stories from your life, that can be now too. It doesn't all have to be the past, right? So feel emboldened and free to be a writer now in your life and pay attention to what's happening with you. And you can, use that writing notebook to just keep thinking about this project that you might decide to do. All right, so I'm going to forward here. And also, what was that like for you? And again, you can use the chat if you want to share what that writing prompt experience was like for you. Did it free up some thoughts? Did you remember anything? Did you feel like maybe you found a starting point? And partly, I'm encouraging you to use the chat because a big part of the writer's life, an active writer's life, is having other writers in their lives and encouraging each other. So, writing is maybe solitary, but it ends up being communal always. So, it's nice to share, especially with people you might know. So, this is more nitty gritty. Scenes are the building blocks of memoir and help make it not boring. So, when I mentioned earlier that you can write nonfiction in a fictiony kind of way, what I'm referring to is things that you typically would associate with fiction: plot, pace, scene, smell, sound, dialogue. Those are all tools the nonfiction writer gets to use as well. And a scene is like a story of something that happened in your life that you can write in a really effective way that just adds a lot of color. So it's the story you tell. So here, as I was thinking about this isn't really a great scene, but that's what every writer says before they read something. But I was just thinking, what is a good example of a scene? So we were out on the boat at the cottage. The sun was high in the sky. I felt warm and excited about our fishing trip. I felt the strongest tug on my line. I couldn't believe it. I pulled and pulled, and there in our boat was the largest trout I'd ever seen. We headed back to the dock, and that's when the boat sputtered and died. That's a brief scene. And on the story briefly goes with some description and an ending, and maybe a line or two about what you learned and what that memory means to you. So I talked about memoir being memory and meaning. It can be made up of scene and summary. Okay. Memory and meaning, scene and summary. So if you think of your memoir as a collection of scenes kind of woven together by interpretation and meaning, that can really make it easier too. You're just writing a bunch of scenes. And then again, you're going to revise it, you're going to rewrite it because that's when the magic happens. You will be, you know, able to create something really beautiful that's not as hard to write as you think. So there's some other notes there. Write freely and as fully as possible. Discover as you write, then do the work of identifying themes and tying things together. Revision is really when the magic happens. And loosen up. In this class I mentioned, these young university students were just starting, but they keep talking about articulation. that they want to get better at their articulation. And I know what they mean. And I think they're being fancy because they think that's what good writing is, that it's fancy writing. And in fact, it's the opposite. Good writing is simple, it's everyday. Write how you talk. That is a beautiful thing to do. And then again, you get to rewrite. So I want to read you. That's my dad's memoir on the left that Chris mentioned, My Story by Russell Durling. And then these are three sort of favorite memoirs. I'm going to read just two brief scenes for you that show you the beauty of ordinary writing also in a scene. So the first is from They Left Us Everything by Plum Johnson, a Canadian writer. Um, and she basically, it's a memoir about going through her dead parents' stuff. The garden was one of Mom and Dad's many battlefields. Cutting Dad's flowers was like beheading his gods. So if they'd had a fight, Mom immediately turned her attention to flower arranging. Dad would arrive home from work and find the house ablaze with blooms. Vases of every description on every table and countertop were stuffed to overflowing with tulips, daffodils, irises, and buttercups. Dad would stand rigidly still and blink as though he'd just seen the living dead. Then, bursting through the door onto the veranda, he'd survey his denuded flower beds and roar, Anne! But Mum wouldn't be home. She'd be down at the club playing tennis. Today, I walk the length of the flower beds with Heather, peering through a lattice of dead stalks and examining woody brown tubers. What do you think? Heather asks. Weeds? Dad called them his Canadian buttercups. They look like weeds to me, she says, poking them with a stick. I just love that scene. And there's so much in there. And I want you to notice that there's dialogue in there. This is a true story. That dialogue is true. It probably isn't a word for word exact retelling because no one is recording their whole lives or taking notes for every conversation. It's okay. You have permission as a nonfiction writer writing their true stories from their life to rebuild dialogue to the best of your memory. So that be free for that. This is from maybe a more, well, definitely a more famous person, Patti Smith. This is from her really successful memoir, Just Kids. And this is, again, like this probably is a more fantastic story, of course, but this is an ordinary moment. At 20 years old, I boarded the bus. I wore my dungarees, black turtleneck, and the old gray raincoat I had bought in Camden. My small suitcase, yellow and red plaid, held some drawing pencils, a notebook, illuminations, a few pieces of clothing, and pictures of my siblings. I was superstitious. Today was a Monday. I was born on Monday. It was a good day to arrive in New York City. No one expected me. Everything awaited me. I immediately took the subway from Port Authority to J Street and Borough Hall and DeKalb Avenue. It was a sunny afternoon. I was hoping my friends might put me up until I could find a place of my own. I went to the brownstone at the address I had, but they had moved. The new tenant was polite. He motioned toward a room at the rear of the flat and suggested that his roommate might know the new address. I walked into the room. On a simple iron bed, a boy was sleeping. He was pale and slim with masses of dark curls, lying bare-chested with strands of beads around his neck. I stood there. He opened his eyes and smiled. So, again, ordinary stories, two really clear scenes. And I will guarantee you that as simple and as ordinary as they are, the authors would have rewritten those, many times. It's never perfect the first time. It just isn't. Writing is a process. But what I wanted you to take from that was just the beautiful ordinariness. And I hope that as you heard those, you something was stirred in you. Maybe you thought about your parents and how they used to yell at each other, or your relationship with gardening, or whatever. There is a connection when you read the ordinary that's sort of made extraordinary. So I promise you that no one's going to ask you to share um, unless you want to after. But will you right now just take a moment and try to write one line or a few sentences of a scene from your life that you would want to talk about as you write stories from your true life or true stories from your life. Again, there's no editor that's over your shoulder. Your grade 6 English teacher is probably long gone. She's definitely not on this call. You don't have to show it to anyone, but just play for a few minutes and see what happens. And I'll bring us back again. Okay, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you're on a roll, keep going. Keep going. But actually, I'll tell you as as we start to draw up here, or wrap up, I should say, that a good writing technique actually is stopping in the middle of a sentence or the middle of a paragraph. And then when you come back the next day, you have something to keep going on. That is a sort of tried and true writing technique. So if I've interrupted you, I'm really sorry. But I hope that you'll pick it up again later. And if you couldn't write anything, hey, no, that doesn't mean anything other than you don't like being forced to write in the middle of a webinar. That's all it means. So again, don't let that discourage you. And if you could write something, then, that's awesome. Um, but, neither, yeah, don't let it discourage you. It's just meant to be a way to step into writing something. So I'd like to just take a moment and to think about what would stop us from writing, because um, that let's demystify that a little bit. Uh, any kind of art making is filled with moments of resistance. There's been books written about this, like we experience resistance to making things, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. And I've been a writer long enough now that I know that resistance, in the form of procrastination, in the form of dread, in the form of why have I done this to myself, are part of my writing process. I now welcome those moments because I know that when I get through to the other side of those, I will land at writing. So it's okay to feel all those feelings. Like writers never have, or their houses are never as clean as when they're about to start a writing project, because that's like a way of avoiding it. So that I don't know a lot of writers who love writing, but they love having written. That's like a famous line. I don't love writing, but I love having written. And I think that's true of a lot of people in a lot of making things. So, my one of the practices I have is when I'm feeling a lot of anxiety about a project or a lot of procrastination, I ask it a question. I say, like, what do you have for me today? What am I really worried about? Like, what's actually stopping me? What message are you bringing me? What gift is there in these feelings of, oh, and, that can help. Da, da, da. Oh, yeah. Leslie Leyland Fields, who I mentioned earlier, she had that "What have you been entrusted with" prompt. And she's written a great book called Your Story Matters, advises people who want to write memoir to stop thinking about writing a book because a book is overwhelming and intimidating. Just write stories, she says. And of course, if you write enough stories, you will have a book at the end of it that you can do what you want with. Um, and Frederick Buechner, again, who I mentioned earlier, wrote, "The story of any one of us is in some measure the story of us all." So that, I think, helps answer the question like, well, why would I write a book? Who cares about my life? Well, we all do. We all do. I want to read about when you got off the bus in New York City. I want to read about your parents and their weird relationship enacted through the cutting of flowers. Like it's wonderful to share our true stories. And you are maybe writing or thinking about writing just for your children or your own discovery process. And that is a great reason to write. So just think about what would stop you. And there's nothing you have felt that other a million gazillion writers a day don't also feel. So it's so normal to feel all those feelings of dread and inadequacy and all of that stuff. But writing is a practice that we can get better at through practice. Here's another quote from Linda Joy Myers, who wrote The Power of Memoir. "The act of remembering, writing, and exploring the deepest reaches of the heart takes courage, and it will change you. Writing a memoir is a way to value yourself and your story, to honor those you have loved and who have loved you. It's a way to heal, to come to terms with your life and leave a tale that others can appreciate. Most memoir writers struggle with reasons for writing their memoir. Their inner critic pops up with, 'What a waste of time. Who would want to read this?' and other nonsense. Write for yourself. Write the stories that fill your mind, heart, and dreams. Find the stories that have meaning to you, stories that give you pleasure to remember. You will be rewarded beyond measure, and your family might thank you too." So I just think that's beautiful. So, what is your why? How will you begin? And if you want to write that in the chat, you can too. Like it's a way of going on the record and saying it out loud. And when we write something down and we share it in a group, it becomes more real, and that's good. That's really, really beautiful. Um, so we have that's me. That is what I have for you today. We can move into questions and answers that I think Chris is going to help with. I wanted to offer you my website. You can reach me through there. I also have a Substack that you can find me at. This does not have to be the end of you asking me questions. I really love encouraging people to do this kind of writing, and you can find me easily online, and I'm happy to answer questions later. So, and often we think of things later. So, KarenStiller.com, it's easy to reach out, and I welcome you to do that.
Thank
All
you very
right.
much. Thanks. Thank you very much, Karen. There is one question, and I wanted to start first. I think it's a question people might have is the presentation will be shared, your PowerPoint. Is that possible? Just
Oh, yeah,
yeah, great.
sure.
The other
Absolutely.
thing is some of the quotes, like I was writing slowly, and I love that quote with that you just read at the end from Linda Meyer. Would it be possible when you're doing that to just sort of like cut and paste, put those quotes like on a sheet of paper, some of the quotes that you read? Because I think that they're short, but they might inspire people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
great. The first question then is, would the memoir service packages you can subscribe to be a help or a hindrance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I thought about doing this, I thought I should look that up because I think it's called Storycraft or something like that. I think that's a great idea. I really do. And I know I have friends who've given it to their parents, say, and they've produced a beautiful, memoir full of stories from their life. So I think if that, that is not a bad idea. Pardon me. I think you can replicate that in your own life also easily by coming up with like there's something about generating a list that is actually in itself a really good writing exercise. So if you sat down and did some brainstorming about what you would like to write about, you could do that yourself and save the monthly subscription fee. But I think that's a really fun way to do it. And I'd encourage you that if you do that, at the end of the year or however long those things usually last, like to look at, then give yourself permission to go in and rearrange and rewrite and, revise, have someone else read it and give you feedback. That's a good practice too. So view it still as a work in progress and not a finished product. But yeah, if that works for you, I think that's fun.
Right. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I think that maybe I know my kids a few years ago gave me it's called Story Worth, and they give you a list of some questions, one a week, and that is a great. I have to confess I haven't finished it, but it is a great thing for spurring memories and share. They get to see it, and at the end, it gets compiled um, into a book if you want. And so if you're for the people out there, if there's like, well, the kids say, oh, I can't think of anything to give you. Well, it's called Story Worth, and that would be a great gift. And as you're talking, Karen, I'm thinking about when we go away in a couple of months, uh, going to Portugal, maybe taking a book and just sort of sitting there and during the day, just sort of writing things out. It's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Um, so the next question is, how do you draw the line between memoir and creative nonfiction, i.e., changing names, locations, and embellishing and or condensing stories? Are there any rules?
Yeah, absolutely. And people talk and think about this a lot. So, creative nonfiction, the creative part does not take away from the nonfiction part. So, when we hear the term creative nonfiction, that's about the how of writing and not the what. So, that's what I was referencing when I talk about like setting scenes and writing descriptively. It's still true. It's always true. So that's important to say. Now, having said that, I mentioned the understanding. It's almost like you have a contract with your reader. So that's a good, I think, helpful way to think about it. And the contract you have with your reader when you say it's nonfiction is that what you write is true. And so, having said that, there's a clause. And that would be for me around dialogue. Like, none of us, we don't have photographic memory. Like, it's okay to, if I'm writing about life back in the 70s or 80s, like I can look up what did Swatch watches look like back then, or I can describe what, I can use photographs to paint a picture. Dialogue is the area, in my opinion, where we have the freedom to reconstruct, because the reader, that I think it's implied in the contract with the reader that probably I don't understand remember this conversation perfectly. And I'll tell you, I learned that in the editing process when The Minister's Wife was acquired by this publisher in the States. I didn't have any dialogue in my book, and that was one of the things they asked me to do because they said it's so much better for the reader. And just, try to remember, Karen. And I could remember the gist of conversations and rebuild them. I didn't do a lot. Like, I didn't reconstruct a, 20-minute conversation, but I was able to write, sort of snippets of dialogue that I knew were accurate and true in their essence. So that is what creative nonfiction means. So I would say to you that memoir that is well written is always creative nonfiction, because if it's, beautifully written, then you're paying attention to those things that make reading and writing good. So I hope that answers. It's a great question, and but it still gets talked about, and some uh, nonfiction writers are fine with like compressing scenes or like events. So I remember one guy who had traveled to the Arctic 7 times or something, and he compressed it into one trip for the sake of his book. I would never do that. I think that's breaking the contract with the reader. I wouldn't make up characters. I wouldn't have a composite character. I You can change names and then but you tell the reader that, that little thing. Some names have been changed to protect identity or so you remember your contract with the reader. You've told them it's true. It needs to be true. Yeah.
Thank you,
Great
Karen.
question.
Okay, the questions keep rolling in. There's one that I'm going to read you one. I think it's more of a comment, and then there's three questions which I'm going to group together because they are all refer to negative memories.
Mm,
Someone has said there's also a book to offer insight and hopes for grandchildren, son and DIL for my grandson. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe that's the
daughter-in-law.
title. Hmm? Pardon?
Daughter-in-law. That means
Oh,
daughter-in-law.
daughter-in-law. Thank you. You would know that. I wouldn't.
Yep.
Learn something new every day. Have yet to start these notes for my grandson to open in the future, but hoping to get it to it. So I think that's great. I mean, one of the
Good.
reasons why it's good to write. I mean, I want to do it like my parents before they died. They we talked about stuff, but there are a lot of things I forgot. I never got a chance to, and I wish I had. So I think that's important to know. Okay, so the questions, okay, these are the ones that are together. Any advice on telling about negative memories that are important and part of my story, but might be hurtful to others to read?
Hmm.
What has been, and the second question, these three are all, I think you probably group them together. What has been your experience with telling the truth as opposed to telling what you want to remember? Number three, oh wait, oopsie. Okay, I've lost something here. There's something how to manage what may be very unhappy memories and moments, but maybe also not so nice interactions with family and friends. So I guess the idea is
Yep.
telling the
I get
negative
it.
aspect versus, without sugarcoating it, but without like,
Yeah. 100%. So, this is like that's so good that you brought that up. And I know there's a chat comment to challenge this idea of who owns a story, and also like the sad, bad, hard stories that we all have that almost always overlap with the stories of other people. And so that is really something that I think every writer has to grapple with. And I'm really glad you brought it up. So, a couple of thoughts. You own what happened to you. And so you get to tell your story, your part of the story, if you want to put it that way. So that is true. The writer Mary Carr, who I mentioned uh, earlier as someone who's written many memoirs, they're hard memoirs. She had a mother, like just nightmarish childhood. You've probably maybe heard of the book The Glass Castle. Very hard childhood stories. So, and even, it doesn't have to be like big catastrophic stories. We all have been impacted by the bad choices of other people. So Mary Carr has also written a book that I highly recommend if you really get into this, called The Art of Memoir. And this is going to sound hard, what I'm about to say, like it has hard edges, but I think it's a good writing advice is that you can mitigate a lot of this by not writing from the posture of victim. So, and that I'm not saying you're not a victim of other people's horrible choices. You probably are. We all have been. But there's a difference from acknowledging that and then writing from the posture of a victim. And Mary Carr, when she says that this is writing about sort of the heart of the writer and the experience of the reader. So, and I understand not all of us are trying to be published, and have our books sold in bookstores. But that's sort of who she's writing to, and that it's tiring and hard to read from the posture of a victim. So again, I know how that sounds like, and I'm sorry, I'm just passing, I'm passing on writing advice about writing something readable and compelling. But if you have the posture of I learned from this, and this is what I learned, it takes a lot of the sting out of it, and it takes a lot of the sort of finger pointing and, you know, name calling or villainization of other people. So I worked with a writer. I'm working with them now who is writing a memoir, and her mother was like horrible. And that's how the mother comes across in the pages, just like a one-dimensional, maniac, quite frankly. And I keep kind of tapping on that door as much as I can because it doesn't feel real. And for the reader, it is a difficult reading experience. So I think that's a craft question almost. But I just offer that. And then also, you can show, this takes a lot of courage, but you can show what you've written to the person it impacts. And I wouldn't ask permission. I would just share it as a way of information sharing. I'm working on my memoir. I've written this passage. It involves you and I and what happened back in 72. And I'm sharing it with you so you can see it. And what that does is it enables you to sleep at night. And that's what I did with the minister's wife. Like I had to, it probably sounds fluffy, the minister's wife, but it's actually it's an extremely honest retelling of a life where people think they have you all figured out. They think you're better than you are. They think you're nicer than you are. They think you love them, every single one of them. They think you are like just Mother Teresa, and I'm not. I'm grumpy, and I didn't like some of them, and I've had people over for dinner that I didn't like. And I had to be nice and, kind. And in the end, actually, through doing that, I think I became nicer and kinder because practice helps with everything in life, not just writing. I tell that in The Minister's Wife. So it's almost like I'm, coming out of the nice closet and saying, this was hard for me. And I had to really wrestle with that, like to be that transparent about my own struggles. And inevitably, I told a few stories about people. I didn't use their names. I still showed it to them. Okay, there's one exception to that because I just couldn't show it to her, and there were no identifying, things about her. But I think that's hard, but I think it's necessary. Show the piece to the person and let them react, and you might actually hear back about a more nuanced, their understanding of what happened. It might actually help you. So I hope that helps. It's a big question. It's a big challenge. Everybody faces it, and people have given it lots of good thought. Anne Lamott, the writer I mentioned, I have this book here because I was using it this morning. This is a great book about writing, bird by bird, some instructions on writing in life. I think in this book is where she gives a famous line, which is, if you didn't want to be written about, you should have been nicer to me. So that's like another extreme. Anne Lamott would not show the stuff to people. She would just do it. So there's different schools of thought. It's a great question.
Okay, well, thanks, Karen. I think one of the things that's also important, and we have one last question, but just throwing in my own 2 cents is I think, you write about how you've overcome the lessons you've learned and about how you've overcome the trauma that was caused. And I think writing things down, it's a way of removing, it's not a panacea, it doesn't always happen, but it's a way of removing the burden from your shoulders. So you're not
Hmm.
carrying, I mean, you mentioned that you could sleep better at night or something like that. So that's really an important point. And I would say, and again, I'm biased, but I have read both of Karen's books, and they're very authentic. I mean, The Minister's Wife, it's uh, there's a lot of humor in it, but there's also realistic things that everybody can identify with. So,
Thank you.
and again, I'm biased, but try it, check and see. Maybe you'll agree. Anyway, the last question I have, and as I see, we're right up to 11 o'clock, is what do you think made Louise Penny such a popular writer?
Yeah, I love that question. And I want to say, just in case, I'm not sure how you end these things. So I just want to, if I can, before
I'll do a farewell after you. Thank
yeah,
you after you.
I just want to make sure that I respond to the chats just in a general way. Like I see those titles of things you might want to write about, and they're all things I would want to read about. I really want to say that. Like there are some great, titles that you've shared there. My Mother and Albert Einstein. I mean, come on, I definitely want to read that. Personal experiences as a wife of a police officer and remote postings. Yeah, my dad was in the RCMP. Like I just Woodstock to Marrakesh. Like they're just wow, you are holders of great stories. And so I just really encourage you to do that. Do it. Just start writing. Just start writing. Right in the middle. Don't worry about the beginning. So Louise Penny, she was my COVID read. I discovered Louise Penny in COVID times, and I think I have one. I'm one behind. I'm one book behind, and I think it's characters. I really think it's how she builds characters, the arc, the narrative arc, the beginning, middle, and end structure of each book, but then also carried on over this series. Ordinary, again, like her language is ordinary, her word choice is ordinary. And if you're a Louise Penny fan, those books are full of scenes. Go back and we can learn from fiction writers too. Find find a scene in the cafe, where they're eating one of their wonderful, delicious sounding breakfasts or whatever. And mark the scene. Here's the beginning of the scene. I can see that this is the end of this scene. And ask yourself how Louise Penny did it. And then think about what happened to you this morning and how that could be a scene. And try to write it. Try to write it like Louise Penny. That is a great tactic to use as we experiment or grow as a writer. So that's a great question. And I need to catch up on Louise.
Okay, thank you, Karen, very much for your time and for sharing this. I think you've given me, and I'm sure you've given our audience members a lots of food for thought. I see somebody has just put in a Q&A. Thank you for this wonderful webinar. Karen will be, as I mentioned, she will be sharing the presentation will be shared to participants, and hopefully we'll have the some of those quotes that she had as well, and links to some of the writers. I know somebody asked what LLF was, and maybe you
Oh,
could.
let me just Louise Leyland Fields. That was just her,
Okay, well,
yeah, the
so
author.
again, and to our audience members, thank you for participating in today's webinar. And again, a special thank you to Karen, our presenter, for today's wonderful session. And I will now turn it back to uh, um, look out for there's a follow-up email that'll contain the recording. Remember that you can invite non-members to attend our webinars and to try us out as a guest to register for upcoming webinars. Please visit the Ottawa branch website at nafrottawa.com. And thank you, everyone. See you at our next webinar.